Hail, friend, and welcome to Olympia, home of the Olympic Games. I've often dreamed of competing in the Games. If my sight was better, my legs and arms were stronger, and my coin purse was fatter. But that is not what the gods want, so I continue making the best of the path they've laid out for me. We're standing in the main section of Olympia, where the Olympic Games themselves took place. Over the course of the festival, athletes competed against each other for prestige and glory to honor themselves and their cities. Enjoy your visit, friend. I'll check in when you're done to make sure you've been paying attention.
The first day of the Olympic Festival began with a swearing-in ceremony for the participating athletes, trainers, and judges. The ceremony took place in front of the altar of Zeus Horkios, or Zeus of the Oath. Athletes would swear that they would follow the Olympic rules, while judges promised to be fair and unbiased. Then the competitions began, starting with a contest between heralds and trumpeters over who would have the privilege of announcing the games. The first day's athletic competitions consisted of wrestling, running, and boxing events for the youngest athletes, aged 12 to 18. The second day began with a grand procession into the Hippodrome to celebrate the start of the popular equestrian events. The most anticipated and spectacular of these was the Quadriga, a 4-horse chariot race. Horse racing events were unique in that the winner was not the most skilled jockey, but the owner of the fastest horse or chariot. The Spartan princess Caniska once took advantage of this loophole to skirt the rule that women weren't allowed to compete, and earned 2 Olympic victories in the process. The rule also allowed for occasionally strange results, like in 416 BCE, when the statesman Alcibiades entered 7 chariots into a race and won 1st, 2nd, and 4th place. After the equestrian competitions, the 40,000 spectators migrated to the stadium to watch the pentathlon events. When the day's events were over, funeral rites were performed for the hero Pelops, the mythical founder of the Olympic Games. The night ended with a celebratory feast and a great parade in honor of the day's victors. Victory at the Olympic Games was one of the highest honors a mortal could achieve, and there were several ways to immortalize that honor. Some athletes had statues erected of themselves, while others commissioned poets to write them victory odes. Oral tradition was very important to the Greeks. These odes, called eponychia, were often composed by the finest poets in the land, such as Pindar, Simonides, and Bacchylides. They were usually played at banquets and celebrations attended by the triumphant athlete or upon his departure from Olympia. The pentathlon took place at the stadium on the second day. As its name implies, it was made up of 5 events: discus throwing, javelin throwing, jumping, racing, and wrestling. There are several differences between the ancient version of events and their contemporary counterparts. For example, ancient long jumpers held weights in their hands to give them momentum to launch, since there was no run-up before the jump. Similarly, if an athlete won the first 3 events, they were immediately declared the winner, instead of being judged by their overall performance in all 5 events. Running events work the same as they do today, with the notable exception of all the athletes being nude. As for wrestling, competitors were not divided by weight class as they are today, but instead by age. The winner was the first to throw his opponent to the ground 3 times. Day 3 started with the most important event of the festival. A procession of Hellenodikai, ambassadors, competitors, and animals made their way to the great altar in front of the Temple of Zeus. The animals were then offered as the official sacrifice of the festival. The afternoon of Day 3 was dedicated to foot racing events. Running was the oldest event of the Games, and in fact was the only event at the first Olympics. The main race was called the Stadion, which was a sprint of around 180 meters. The winner was granted the honor of lending his name to the 4-year period between the Games. This period was known as the Olympiad. The 4 years that followed the first Games in 776 BCE were known as the Olympiad of Coroebus of Elis, the first Olympic champion. Once all the competitions were over, a public banquet was held in the Prytaneon to celebrate the day's victors. Day 4 was mainly for combat events. Wrestling matches were held in the morning, followed by boxing and pankration. Pankration was a no-holds-barred mix between wrestling and boxing. Almost all moves were permitted, except for biting, poking the eyes or mouth, and striking the genitals. The event was very popular, and it was seen as the ultimate expression of strength and technique. Later on in the afternoon, there was a unique racing event called the Hoplitodromos, or Race in Armor. In this event, competitors wore a helmet and held a shield to simulate running in the battlefield. The Hellenodikai, or judges of the Greeks, were both the game's adjudicators and their organizers. They hailed from Elis, the city in charge of the sanctuary of Olympia, and new judges were elected each Olympiad. They had several responsibilities. Before the games started, they decided which athletes would be allowed to compete and supervise their training. They also drew lots to make the competition brackets. During the games themselves, they picked the winners and kept an eye out for foul play. For the latter, they were assisted by stick and whip-wielding umpires who stood near the athletes and punished them if they were caught cheating. Victory in Olympia was one of the most prestigious honors in all of Greece. Not only would victors be showered in glory in their home city, but their names would be known across Greece. The temptation to glory led some athletes to break their oath to Zeus and cheat. This could be dangerous, as there were many possible punishments should cheaters be caught. They could be disqualified and fined, or if they were caught cheating during a match, they would be beaten by nearby umpires. The most powerful deterrent of cheating, however, was shame. At the foot of Mount Kronios, and on the way to the stadium, were a group of bronze statues called Zanes, the plural of Zeus. These statues were inscribed with the names of the cheating athletes, how they cheated, and the fine that was imposed. The Zanes, which were funded by cheaters' fines, were strategically placed to be highly visible. Individuals or even entire cities could be found guilty of cheating. The Prytaneion was the administrative center of the cult of Olympia and the Olympic Games. The building housed the sanctuary's priests, as well as the game's officials. It was also used to stage the grand banquet held on the evening of the third day to honor victors. It also had a sacred function. Its central chamber was the location of the Fire of Hestia, a sacred flame that burned day and night. This fire was used to light the other altars around the sanctuary. This practice may have partially inspired the modern tradition of carrying the Olympic torch.
Hello again! I hope you enjoyed your visit. With their spectacular events and lavish banquets, the Olympic Games were a feast for the senses. I am certain even Zeus himself was entertained by the festivities. Now, is there anything else you'd like to do? Wonderful! Let the mental Olympics begin. Let's start with an easy one. Which notable woman won an event in the Games? Correct! She won 2 equestrian events thanks to her savvy horse purchases. This next question is slightly more challenging. Which of the following is not a famous Greek poet? You are right! Brasidas was a renowned Spartan general, and he didn't have time for rhymes and pretty words. Time for the final question. How many events were in the pentathlon? Yes! The Greek word for pende means 5, and the pentathlon had 5 events. Well done, my friend! You truly possess a sharp mind. I can tell you're feeling restless. Let me see if I can find you something interesting.
Welcome to Argos, traveler. I have always admired the dedication of Greek metalworkers. Without them, we would not have the inspiring monuments that stir the hearts of Greek citizens everywhere. This is Argos, one of the oldest cities in Greece. The Argives were an ingenious people, famous for innovations in areas like military tactics. However, what they were most renowned for was their metallurgic artistry, especially with bronze. I hope you enjoy yourself. Look for me at the end of your visit.
The area that would become Argos was inhabited as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, but it was in the 7th century BCE that it officially became a city-state. One of Argos's major pillars was its metallurgical industry. As far back as the 8th century BCE, the city was famed for making products like long dress pins and tripod cauldrons, as well as impeccable body armor. In addition to their technical excellence, the Argives were also creative, as seen in their masterful bronze sculpting, which became prominent in the city during the 6th and 5th century BCE. Bronze is an alloy composed of 90% copper and 10% tin. Because of this, copper and tin needed to be smelted and combined to create the material needed for sculpting. After the bronze alloy was formed, it was melted in special furnaces. They required a tremendous amount of fuel and were usually supplied with charcoal made from specific types of wood. It's possible they were also coated with a protective lining of clay, which would have been sensible given the melting point of bronze is approximately 950 degrees Celsius. Once the bronze was melted and collected, the furnaces were dismantled and dumped.
Τι συνέβη μόλις?
In the 8th century BCE, most small-scale statues were molded using a complicated and lengthy method called solid lost wax casting. From the 7th century BCE onwards, metalworkers adopted the more efficient hollow lost wax casting. At its core, this process involved using sculpting models from wax, making molds over these models, then filling the molds with bronze to produce the desired shapes. The process was advantageous because it saved on materials, produced lighter statues, and reduced the chance of possible defects. Once all the pieces of the sculpture were molded, they were welded together and subjected to the cold working process. This process involved repairing the sculpture's flaws by filling any holes and cracks with specifically measured bronze patches. Afterwards, The sculpture was scraped, chiseled, and polished until it was deemed satisfactory. Decorative details like hair, eyebrows, and mustaches were added with the use of a sharp tool. Eyes, which could be inset with ivory, glass, or silver, were attached to their sockets using a resinous kind of glue. Teeth and fingernails were inlaid with silver, and lips and nipples with copper. These small touches added color and contributed to the sculpture's lifelike appearance. Bronze sculptures have a long and varied history in Greece. During the geometric period of 900 to 700 BCE, the sculptures mainly depicted idealized heroes, charioteers, and horses, and most of them were dedicated to sanctuaries. The Orientalizing period followed in the 7th century BCE. During this time, Greeks began adopting sculpting techniques from the East, and the depicted statues expanded to include mythological creatures like griffins and sphinxes. The Archaic period saw statues that reflected a better understanding of human anatomy, which eventually culminated in the realistic and powerful human sculptures of the Hellenistic period. Argos was the home of Polykleitos, one of the most famous sculptors in ancient Greece. His works, like the Doryphorus and Diadomenos, as well as his treatise on sculpting called the Canon, had a massive impact on the art as a whole, particularly in regards to ideal body proportions. Sadly, the original versions of Polykleitos' sculptures have been lost, along with most bronze statues from antiquity. As time went on, many bronze statues were melted down to be recycled in things like weapons, ammunition, and even church bells. Because of this, marble copies from the Roman period are our best evidence of the masterpieces of Greek sculpture.
I see you have completed your tour. I trust you have a new appreciation for Greek sculptures after learning of the heart and soul that was poured into each step of their creation. Now, what else would you like to do? Then let us dive right in. Here is your first question. Which era of sculpting came first? The Orientalizing period lasted for most of the 7th century BCE. It introduced Eastern sculpting techniques to the Greek world. But it was not the earliest era. Try a different answer. Correct. The geometric period lasted from 900 to 700 BCE and mostly featured small-scale statues and statuettes of heroes and horses. On to the second question. Bronze was an alloy composed of which two metals? Yes. To get the bronze required for sculpting, metal workers first needed to smelt copper and tin. One last question for you. Which renowned sculptor was a native of Argos? Yes. Polykleitos was based in Argos and had an enormous impact on the art of sculpting. You've done well, traveler. Your knowledge of metalwork is astounding. Then, farewell, traveler. May we meet again soon. Welcome, traveler, to the Sanctuary of Asclepios, a place of rest and healing. The Sanctuary of Asclepios is an amazing place, even for those with only a passing interest in medicine. It was a fascinating location, combining the mystical, religious, and scientific. And if someone happened to pass out, they'd luckily be surrounded by skilled physicians. This is the Sanctuary of Asclepios, the god of medicine. It was here that the sick and weary came, seeking cures for their ailments. Sometimes the medical practitioners provided the cures, and sometimes the healing came from the gods themselves. This tour will help explain the inner workings of the sanctuary, as well as the unique way the Greeks approached medicine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The ill and infirm came to this sanctuary to pray and offer sacrifices to Asclepios, the god of medicine. According to myth, Asclepios was once a mortal physician who eventually became a god. He had many sanctuaries across Greece, but the most famous was in Epidaurus. When pilgrims passed through the entrance of the sanctuary, they could read this inscription: "When you enter the abode of the god which smells of incense, you must be pure, and thought is pure when you think with piety."
Di tutto in.
Medical steles constituted a sort of hub between medicine, religion, and the divine. They were slabs with inscriptions that praised Asclepios' virtues and merit and described his methods of healing. The inscriptions relayed the dreams patients had within the abaton, one of the most important buildings in the sanctuary. The steles outlined the patient's name, their disease, and how they were cured by Asclepios. They were probably written by the sanctuary's priests, or at least under the priest's supervision. Asclepios was a complex deity. In addition to being a god, he was also a trained physician and disciple of the centaur Chiron.
So proud I was born to be Spartan. Right through the fire they fade.
In ancient Greece, religion was inseparable from rites, processions, and sacrifices. This was no different in Epidaurus, and visitors to Asclepios' sanctuary needed to prepare themselves accordingly. Pilgrims cleaned themselves in order to be pure, then offered Asclepios food like honey cakes, cheesecakes, baked meats, and figs. The food was placed on the sanctuary's holy table, where it was presumably later taken by priests. After the preliminary offerings, visitors were allowed to enter the abaton, where they would hopefully encounter Asclepios in a dream. Medical steles also mention that healed patients sometimes gave additional offerings to Asclepios as thanks for being cured. Asclepios was originally born a mortal and was the product of an affair between the god Apollo and a mortal, Coronis. Apollo killed Coronis after discovering she had been unfaithful and ordered her body burned on a funeral pyre. However, he rescued his unborn child from Coronis' womb before the fire consumed her body. Apollo gave the baby to the centaur Chiron, who raised Asclepios and taught him to practice medicine. Over time, Asclepios became so skilled in the art of healing, he could even raise the dead. This angered Zeus, who sent Asclepios to Hades with a thunderbolt. Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes responsible for making Zeus's thunderbolts. Then, Zeus revived Asclepios, making him immortal and deifying him in the process. In sculptures, pottery, mosaics, and coins, Asclepios was portrayed holding a staff intertwined with a sacred snake. The staff is a symbol of medicine that still endures to this day. The Epitapeion was the priest's residence. As the link between patients and the gods, priests were essential to the operation of the sanctuary. They were often elected into the priesthood for one-year periods, but could also buy themselves a position if they were wealthy enough. In addition to interpreting patients' dreams in the abaton, priests both supervised and performed sacrifices and rituals. During these functions, they were usually clad in white. The abaton was built in the northern boundary of the sanctuary, where it surrounded a sacred well whose water was believed to have therapeutic properties. The Abaton was where pilgrims went for incubation, or dream rituals. Details of the incubation ritual have been described in unearthed medical steles. They were also noted in Aristophanes' play Plutos, which featured a more comedic view of the process. Incubation was the dream ritual pilgrims experienced in the Abaton. After completing the necessary preliminary rituals, pilgrims were allowed to enter the sacred building, where they lay prone. As they took in the smell of burning incense, the sanctuary's priests extinguished the oil lamps and asked them to sleep in silence. Once they were asleep, Asclepios would appear in their dreams and give his medical advice. The advice included diet and treatment recommendations, as well as requests for specific offerings or religious rituals. Upon waking up, priests interpreted the patient's dreams, unless a patient had been miraculously healed in their sleep. However, if a patient was completely beyond help, they were removed from the Abaton. This was to adhere to a ritual law that stated that no one could die or be born within the building.
I see you've completed the tour. I hope you enjoyed your time in the sanctuary. As you can see, gods and miracles were just as important to the healing process as medicine was. Now, what else would you like to do? Excellent. Here is your first question. Which mythical creatures made Zeus's thunderbolts? Correct. Zeus's thunderbolts were crafted by Cyclops. On to the second question. What was the name of the building where incubation occurred? Yes, pilgrims entered the Abaddon to undergo a dream ritual in the hopes of curing their ailments. One final question for you. Who was Asclepios' father? Yes, Apollo was Asclepios' father, and his mother was a mortal named Coronis. You've proven you know the sanctuary inside and out. Well done. Very well. May your quest for knowledge be fruitful and fulfilling.